The order came through with the kind of bureaucratic calm that always made the worst assignments sound like the easiest ones. Write the official history of humanity's final retreat from the Outer Rim colonies. Confirm troop withdrawal patterns. Close the file. Nothing about it read like it would matter to anyone beyond the handful of historians who might one day flip through it out of professional obligation. My name is Ines Cavarel, and at the time of the Outer Rim Retreat Survey, I held the rank of Senior Field Historian within the Concord Military Archive, a division tasked with writing the permanent record of every major campaign the Concord had ever fought, including the ones we would rather not examine too closely. My job was not to interpret. It was to confirm, to walk the ground after the fighting stopped and make certain the official account matched what had actually happened, so that no future historian could argue the record was anything other than true. The Outer Rim campaign had ended 11 years earlier, following what Concord military history called humanity's final organized retreat, a controlled withdrawal from 17 colonies along the rim, executed under sustained pressure during the last major engagements of the war. It was held up, in every textbook I had ever read, as proof that even the most stubborn species in known space eventually broke when pushed far enough. I had read the official account a dozen times before ever setting foot on the rim myself. I had never once questioned it. I should have known better the moment I saw the first withdrawal manifest. I began my survey at Colony Perrin 6, the largest of the 17 sites, expecting the physical evidence of a hurried, desperate evacuation. The kind of retreat that leaves scorch marks and abandoned equipment, and the particular chaos of people leaving faster than they can properly plan for. What I found instead was a colony shut down with a precision that unsettled me before I had even finished my first walkthrough. Structural supports sealed properly. Power systems powered down in the correct sequence rather than simply cut. Equipment removed in careful stages rather than left behind in panic. It did not look like a retreat. It looked like a decommissioning, carried out by people who had rehearsed exactly how to do it. I logged the observation the way I logged everything, in careful, neutral language, assuming perhaps an unusually disciplined command structure had simply executed the withdrawal better than most retreating forces managed. But as I moved from Perrin 6 to the second site, then the third, the pattern repeated with a consistency that made the word coincidence increasingly difficult to justify in my own reports. Near the edge of my survey team, working quietly through her own portion of the site logs, was Dessa Wren, an archivist I had specifically requested join the survey after hearing, secondhand, about her involvement in the border investigation years earlier and the reconciliation review more recently. I had expected, given her reputation, someone difficult to work with. I found instead someone who asked exactly the right questions, at exactly the moments no one else thought to ask them. "You've noticed it too," I said to her on the third day, standing in the empty central hub of Colony Perrin 9, its shelves bare, its walls untouched. "I noticed it at the first site," she said. "I was waiting to see how long it would take you." "It looks rehearsed." "It is rehearsed," she said. "Eins, do you know what the difference is between a retreat and an evacuation drill executed under real conditions?" I admitted I did not. "A retreat happens because you have no choice left," she said. "A drill happens because you've already decided, long before the moment arrives, exactly what you intend to do with it. Everything I have seen across these 17 colonies looks like a plan that had been rehearsed dozens of times before it was ever actually needed." I wanted to tell her that 11 years of official Concord history could not possibly be built on a misreading this significant, that 100 senior officers had reviewed this campaign and confirmed its conclusions long before either of us had been assigned to walk its ground. But something in her certainty, as it always seemed to, settled into my chest and refused to leave. We continued the survey across the remaining colonies over the following 2 weeks, and the pattern held at every single site without exception. Withdrawal manifests that matched almost precisely coordinates the Concord had never surveyed, but that appeared, buried deep in supply logs no one had cross-referenced in over a decade, as destinations already prepared to receive exactly the population and equipment being moved away from them. Fuel consumption records for transport vessels that exceeded what the officially logged cargo could possibly have required. The same discrepancy I realized with a growing unease that had first been noticed years earlier during the Sol system investigation, a discovery I had read about only in passing in an old registry file, never imagining I would find its echo written across an entirely different campaign. I filed my first formal report midway through the survey, describing the pattern as I had rationalized it to myself, an unusually disciplined withdrawal. Perhaps aided by advanced planning the Concord's own intelligence had simply failed to detect at the time. I recommended the anomaly be noted but not pursued further. It was, I told myself, the responsible conclusion, given how thin the evidence still felt on its own. The reply came back within 2 days, brief and administrative. Noted. Continue survey as scheduled. Historical conclusions of the Outer Rim campaign remain unchanged pending further evidence. I should have felt reassured by the confirmation. Instead, I found myself staring at the withdrawal manifests spread across my display, at the destination coordinates that matched nothing in Concord records, and thinking again about drills rehearsed long before they were needed. It was at the 14th site, a small research outpost called Perrin 14, that the survey uncovered something that shifted the entire investigation forward in a way neither Dessa nor I had anticipated. Behind a reinforced door in what had once served as the Colonies' logistics office, we found a sealed terminal, faintly powered by a backup source we nearly missed entirely. Dessa worked the access controls with the same careful patience she seemed to bring to everything, and when the screen finally resolved, what filled it was not a record of casualties or emergency orders. It was a training schedule, not a schedule for this retreat. A schedule dated years before the Outer Rim campaign ever began, cataloging dozens of full-scale withdrawal exercises conducted across multiple colonies, each one timed, evaluated, and refined against a standard that had nothing to do with any military engagement the Concord had ever recorded against these sites. The final exercise listed, dated less than a year before the actual retreat, carried a notation I read 3 times before I fully absorbed its meaning. Final rehearsal complete. Live execution pending appropriate conditions. "This isn't a retreat plan," Dessa said quietly, reading the same line over my shoulder. "This is a training log for one." "They rehearsed losing 17 colonies," I said, the words feeling strange even as I said them aloud, as though losing them was always the intended outcome, not the failure. "Not losing them," Dessa corrected. "Relocating them, under cover of a defeat convincing enough that no one would ever think to look past it." She turned to face me fully. "Ines, when was the last time you saw wreckage at any of these sites consistent with the scale of engagement the official history claims occurred here?" I had not. Not once across 14 colonies. I filed an amended report that evening, more carefully worded than the first, describing the training schedule and its implications without drawing conclusions the archive might dismiss outright. I requested for the first time since accepting the assignment that someone with authority beyond my own review the evidence directly. The reply came back 3 days later, not from the military archive at all, but from a review committee I had never heard referenced before. Assembled. I would learn. In response to similar findings quietly surfacing from historians reviewing other campaigns across Concord military history at nearly the same time, you are not the only one finding this. Hold position. Further instructions to follow. Within a week, I found myself aboard a Concord vessel, the Halvorn Reach, once again in a briefing room, though this time the faces around the table were almost entirely unfamiliar to me, drawn from archive divisions across a dozen different campaigns rather than a single investigation. The officer leading the briefing was, to my genuine surprise, Talon Voss, the same Farai strategist I recognized from Dessa's earlier accounts of the border investigation, his posture carrying the particular weariness of someone confronting a pattern for what was clearly not the first time. "Historians reviewing 4 separate campaigns across the war," he began, "have now independently identified the same anomaly historian Cavarel documented across the Outer Rim colonies, training records, rehearsal schedules, and withdrawal manifests that predate the engagements they were officially supposed to result from." He activated the display behind him, and a chart filled the room showing multiple campaigns highlighted in pale amber, each one marked with a date range that, I noted with a cold, settling certainty, extended back nearly 15 years before the war's official conclusion. What we are looking at, Talon continued, is not evidence of a species that lost 17 colonies through military defeat. It is evidence of a species that spent over a decade rehearsing the controlled loss of colonies it had already decided, long before any battle occurred, it intended to eventually give up. Give up to what end? Asked a delegate near the front, a Vandari elder I did not recognize, though her posture suggested the same weary recognition I had come to expect from anyone confronting this pattern for the first time. Talon did not answer immediately. Instead, he activated a secondary display, showing the destination coordinates recovered from the outer rim manifests alongside similar unresolved coordinates recovered from the other 3 campaigns under review. None of these destinations match anything in Concord survey records, he said. Whatever these colonies were relocated to, it exists entirely outside anything we have ever mapped. Meaning the retreats weren't defeats at all, I said, the observation settling out of me before I had fully decided to speak it aloud. Meaning, Talon said, that every retreat the Concord has ever counted as a victory over the past 15 years of this war may have been humanity quietly relocating exactly the population and resources it wanted moved, at exactly the pace it wanted them moved, while allowing us to record each relocation as a battle we believed we had won. The room fell into the same heavy silence I had come to recognize from every briefing like this one. The particular quiet of a group of people realizing that the war they thought they had fought bore only a partial resemblance to the one that had actually taken place. I was assigned in the days that followed to work directly with the review committee's analysis team, cross-referencing rehearsal schedules recovered from all 4 campaigns against the broader timeline of the war itself. The pattern that emerged, the longer we studied it, was almost too disciplined to be believed. Each rehearsed retreat had been scheduled and refined years in advance, then executed only once specific conditions were met. Conditions that, upon closer study, appeared to correlate precisely with moments when Concord military pressure had reached a level sufficient to make the retreat appear, to any outside observer, like a genuine and costly defeat. I sat one evening with Marcus Ilya, the human liaison, who had by this point become something of a quiet fixture across every investigation I had encountered involving humanity's wartime conduct. His continued presence in Concord space, feeling less like a diplomatic formality with each passing year and more like something else entirely. "You've seen the rehearsal logs," I said to him. "What do you make of them?" He studied the recovered schedule for a long moment before answering, careful in the way he always seemed to be. "I make of them," he said slowly, "that you're looking at 15 years of practice in us. Not 15 years of losing ground. 15 years of learning exactly how convincingly we could lose it, until every retreat looked exactly like the kind of defeat your own war doctrine would accept without question. Why go to that length? Why not simply negotiate a withdrawal? Because a negotiated withdrawal would have required you to believe we were choosing to leave," Marcus said. "And a species you believe is choosing something is a species you keep negotiating with. A species you believe you defeated is a species you stop watching closely enough to notice what it's actually rehearsing for next." I asked him the question I suspected the entire committee had been circling for days without quite finding the nerve to ask directly. "Rehearsing for what, Marcus? If losing these colonies was never the goal, what was?" He was quiet for a long time, watching the star chart between us rather than me. "I think," he said finally, "you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what we were rehearsing toward. The signal from Sol already answered that years ago, if anyone had thought to connect it. The question you should be asking is how many more rehearsals across, how many more campaigns are still sitting in archives no one has thought to review yet, and how much of what the Concord calls victory over the last 2 centuries was actually just us finishing the drill." That question followed me through the remainder of the investigation, growing heavier with each passing day. Talon convened an emergency session once the pattern across all 4 campaigns had become impossible to dismiss as coincidence. "There was no series of defeats," he said quietly to the assembled committee. "There was a decade and a half of controlled, deliberate relocation, executed under cover of a war we believed we were winning, refined through rehearsal until it was convincing enough to become the official record of our victory." "Then what?" The Vandari elder asked, her voice carrying a strain I recognized from every leader who had confronted this pattern before her. Was the actual war fought over? If every major turning point we credited to our own strength was staged for our benefit? Marcus, standing quietly near the back of the room, answered before Talon could. The war was real, he said. Every battle, every loss, every cost, all of it happened exactly as your records describe. What wasn't real was the ending you assigned to it. You fought a war you believe you won. We fought the same war toward an outcome we had already rehearsed reaching, years before the fighting even finished. I would file my final report on the Outer Rim campaign in the days that followed, though it bore almost no resemblance to the confirmation survey I had originally been assigned to complete. I would describe as carefully and neutrally as my position required the true shape of what the evidence suggested, not 17 colonies lost to defeat, but 17 colonies relocated according to a plan rehearsed for over a decade, executed with a discipline convincing enough to become permanent Concord military doctrine. I have come to believe that was the truest lesson of the entire investigation. The Concord had spent 2 centuries measuring its victories against humanity by how much ground it believed it had taken. It had never once considered that the ground being given up might have been chosen, rehearsed, and released precisely on schedule by the very people we believed we had finally beaten back.